So this is the mind and design, or how I learned to stop worrying and listen to the brain. So I'm a double major in computer science and cognitive science, and I really appreciate that I'm able to have this interdisciplinary education. I think that they go together really well, and there's been so many connections between the two majors that I've learned throughout my classes. Maybe not as many connections as there are between the neurons in your brain, but a good number, such as and also that computer scientists have used the knowledge of the brain to build better computers, as well as cognitive scientists using models of computation in understanding how the mind works on a higher level. So I just think it's really amazing how they go together. But what brought computer science and cognitive science together for me even more was not just thinking of the mind as a computer. It was my interdisciplinary education in both that brought me to UX. And in UX, you should think of the mind as the epicenter of a person's experience. So since my spring of freshman year, I've taken a course each semester that was part of this course thread. And I figured now would be a pretty good time to present. I'll actually be focusing on these three classes: Introduction to Cognitive Science, Needs and Usability Assessment, and Critical Making, Materials, Protocol, and Culture. I also am really inspired through my participation in Berkeley Innovation, which I think is one of the best human-centered design clubs on campus, but I may be biased as the current president and someone who was able to take what I've learned in my classes and actually apply it to projects in the field and with different partners and companies. So human-centered design, if we just break it down, a human is you guys, centered is focusing on you guys, and design is where it gets trickier. There's a lot of different definitions of a design online, some more theoretical, some more practical, some people across the spectrum of the disciplines. In my experience, I found that design is the creation of something that works well aesthetically, experientially, etc., in the context that it is needed. Human-centered design, you take that design and you create it for the user or human's needs, always keeping that person in mind. User-centered design is just a subset of human-centered design, but for the rest of the talk, I'll talk about user experience specifically. So user experience. Design is not just about how something looks. It's about usability, interaction, experience. For example, these are two sites that you can use to find short-term housing and subletting. One has more aesthetic design than the other, I'm sure you can guess which, but both are widely popular. While Airbnb has a more beautiful site to fit your short-term housing search, Craigslist is easy to understand and to go through the pages. People are now using Airbnb, but everybody can find Craigslist easy to understand, and people still use it, even with these new sites coming up. For a more physical, tangible example, this is a picture from the Leader of Light project, which creates sunlit-powered bulbs made from plastic bottles that light up the homes in the Philippines. It's not fancy, but it fits the user's needs, and it works, and it's affordable for these people. So with UX design, you need to keep the brain in mind, pun intended. I found this really great infographic on a blog about someone who had studied cognitive science and then became a designer from their experiences in school and in their own life. I think it's really great because it shows how different parts of the brain relate to UX on like the physical level of how the brain works, and also how you can incorporate this into your designs. And I'm going to go through a couple parts of it just to expand on the things that I've learned in my classes. So one thing that is thought and reason. Thinking happens in the prefrontal cortex, and that's where everything comes together, and you take different ideas, and it's like the complex part of your brain that is like the most evolved that distinguishes humans from our original ancestors, is that our prefrontal cortex has been evolved a lot more, and that's where we can do this high-level thinking. Similarly, we have an area of brain called the hippocampus, which is the limbic system, and that is where memories can be formed. That's not necessarily where they're stored, but what's important is in design, at least in the beginning, is or in user experience, is the formation of the memory in order to see how well the design works. So with thought and memory, in UX and thought, what Key parts of designing a user experience are user interviews and user testing. The goal of user interviews is to learn information about the user in the form of stories and emotions. And they're also about need finding. It's not just understanding other people's thoughts, but it's about putting together what they're saying in order to recognize the needs and the problems that are out there. So your prefrontal cortex better be working too during these user interviews. It's not just about them thinking, but it's about you actively thinking and understanding what they're saying. With user testing, the goal is to learn what users do and do not understand about how to work a product. Especially during user tests, you aim to follow the thought process of the user. Also related to user testing, and something I learned in CogSci 1, the Introduction to CogSci course, is that one part of the cognitive revolution for people actually believing that the brain is important in behavior and processes is the George Miller's magical number 7 plus or minus 2, which talks about how there are chunks of information and that there's a constraint on human mental representations that can be worked with by chunking information up and having like a hierarchical relation to how you show information to people. And it's something you should keep in mind with user testing because you don't want the user to get bogged down in too many options. Now for UX and memory, there's two different types of memory, or the background of memory. And so those are episodic memory and semantic memory. Episodic memory is event memory. It's most useful to the human-centered designer during user interviews when you want to hear about specific experiences and events in order to uncover the underlying needs. With semantic memory, it's factual memory, and it's useful to human-centered designers during user tests where you want to see the way a product works is easy to pick up and remember. In user interviews, to get the right events, you want to ask the right kind of questions in order to prime responses that can come up in their mind. Some kind of, you want to probe for what's unspoken or unrealized. Some good kinds of questions would be about relating to emotion, how do you feel when? Knowledge, what do you know about? And sensory, what does it look like when? Or background, you are A, in order to get the best information from someone and to get the experiences that can help you tailor your product better. Another part of the user experience and the mind is the amygdala, which performs primary roles in the formation and storage of memories associated with emotional events. Particularly positive or negative events are strongly associated with their related memories. So in my critical making class, I read a paper called Uncomfortable User Experiences. This kind of plays off of negative or unfamiliar emotions. In this case, the human is the center of the experience. I read this paper by Steve Benford and others, which talked about scenarios that can lead to a set of design tactics. And so the scenarios are visceral, where you could design unpleasant wearables and tangibles; cultural, designing culturally resonant devices; intimacy, establish intimacy with strangers; and control, require participants to take greater control. These target emotions, and the amygdala strengthens the memories and experiences through this, leading to experiences that are better remembered. One example that they talk about for control is that there was a bucking bronco ride controlled through a chest strap breathing monitor that highlighted the potential of using breathing to control rides. This would focus users inward on their own feelings during the ride, and that's one way that making someone have greater control could change their experience through emotion. Now, talking about positive emotions and playing to those emotions, this is a project I worked on in the critical making class. The goal was to create a new experience through motion, and my group decided to focus on the swing. We called it nostalgia, and the goal of the project was that the higher and longer a person swung, the farther back in time they were transported through their memories and nostalgia for childhood, because we would play different music and like TV show theme songs and advertising based on how high they were swinging. So you could start off and it might be something from like Hannah Montana, and the farther you go back, you might start to hear Barney, or you'd hear like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or like an old Tamagotchi ad or things like that, so that you'd be transported back through your memories, like your positive memories, in order to have a better experience and better remember the event. The last thing that I would like to talk about with the brain and UX is the sensory cortex. And that is where all the senses, your touch and feel and tangible, come together to help you really experience a product. So for this example, last semester, a group of us in Berkeley Innovation designed a children's museum exhibit on fungi for the children's museum that's being designed in Santa Cruz. We wanted to keep human-centered design in mind. And a lot of the times, design focuses on the visual aspects, but there are so many more other senses that humans are capable of and want to experience. We changed our design throughout the semester from fancy touch screens that could teach you about fungi when you touch different places to an exhibit that took the outdoors indoors so that children could touch and feel nature, fungi, and the like. And we really thought that it would help with a better learning experience for the children too, because once they learn things in this environment, next time they go outside and are actually playing in the backyard, they might see these things and remember them because the context was similar to that of the museum. So your mind stores experiences in many ways. It combines memories with thoughts, emotions, senses, and it's best to design experiences worth remembering. Now I'd like to talk a bit about the lessons I learned through my process in the Human-Centered Design course thread. Relating to that, my original subtitle, designers may worry about the perfect look and feel, but the brain really does have the final say, because when you're creating an experience, you're targeting different parts of the brain, and it's best to listen and think about what's actually happening up there and how people will actually experience it from within. I learned that testing and iterating is extremely important, and that you really shouldn't expect to get something right at the first go. And that comes from doing the user experience research from the beginning, just to find out the needs, all the way through multiple tests when you're designing. It's also not about how technology can solve problems, but it's about what the problems and needs are and if technology can solve them best. As a computer science major, it's difficult to say this because I really love technology, but through my classes, such as critical making, I've seen that making and designing start with the basics, simply like a piece of paper and sketching something, to building with wood. And technology can improve upon that, but doesn't necessarily need to be the main focus of design. Thank you.